Hi, I'm Dazon Dixon Jallo, and I'm with Sister Love in Atlanta, Georgia. And I am so grateful and just happy to be sitting here with my friend Morenike Ukpong with the new HIV Vaccine and Microbicide Advocacy Society based in Nigeria and all across. I think you do some work outside of Nigeria, obviously,
we do.
And also representing some of the community leadership here with the CROI conference.
Right.
And so thank you for taking time, because I know it's a really, really busy schedule.
You're very much welcome.
And it's so good to see you. It's been too long. I wanted to just jump right into this conversation. First, I really want to make sure people know a little bit about who you and we are.
Okay.
And so just to start out and to bring it in the context of the CROI meeting is, what is your work? And how does that fit into the world of HIV research?
Excellent. And thanks for inviting me for this interview.
I'm so glad you can make it.
It's really cool what we have to discuss today. Within the CROI leadership, I work with the Community Liaison Subcommittee, which focuses extensively on doing two major things. Looking critically at the science program to ensure that the issues discussed and put it on the table are relevant to the community, and at the same time also actively involved in designing the community component of the program. I have been on that for the last 4 years, but prior to that I've been doing a lot of work in the community, with my focus being essentially on facilitating the community voice in HIV prevention research primarily, and then in more general terms, enhancing the visibility of key populations. In many ways I do that, but of course on the platform of the organization, it's about pushing with the government and also enhancing grassroots to know the issues and then be able to speak for themselves.
Absolutely.
So that's the direction,
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we've been on common pathways for a very long time.
Yes.
And in terms of where we do our work, of course, as a community organization, I find it interesting that, especially when we're talking about women of African descent, Black women, that we have honed in so much more on the prevention research, which especially in the leadership around research. And there's a couple of observations for me in that, and that is, I think over the past few years, not that many, but over the past few years, there's actually been an upsurge of women of African descent being much more active, engaged as advocates, also as researchers in this work. We could go through some of the folks who are high profile and listed on some of the different presentations and papers here.
Agree.
And that really excites me.
Agree.
What I'm really interested in is what are you seeing right now as the field itself in terms of, because I'm less familiar with the treatment field, but I know it to some degree. And in that context, that there's not as much of a divide, if you will, in terms of talking about gender and HIV, because treatment is treatment.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about prevention, there are some differences.
Oh, yes.
And everything isn't equal.
I agree.
And so in terms of this year's CROI, what are some of the things that have highlighted women's prevention research? What do we know? What do we still not know? What do we still need to know? I'm hearing some really great things, and then I'm hearing some concerning things about the state of microbicide research, for example. Give me some of your own insight, because you sit at both the 30,000 foot view and right here at the 5 foot view. So
I think those issues you bring up are really, really great ones. For me, generally, I think one of the big things about women's engagement within the biomedical HIV prevention space has been the issues about the way HIV had affected women. And not only that, the fact that I think women realize that we have to speak up for ourselves, otherwise we would not be spoken up for. Then the movement for microbicide research itself was actually pushed it was from a woman's agenda. It was the women that pushed that. And that saw a lot of mobilization of women, including women from the reproductive health field coming into the microbicide field. And so you did see that increase in the number of women in the advocacy front from the microbicide field. Sadly, in the last few years, that very space seems to be disappearing with the not so encouraging results of the microbicide trials. And this is my perspective, completely mine. I didn't discuss this with anybody. The upsurge with the success of the PrEP. And not only is the upsurge of the success with the PrEP, the association of the success of PrEP with risk, and risk being a lot more about men and less about female. And so kind of that evolution of the field seems to have increased the space for men. And the poor success stories with microbicide, and then sadly, it's not working well for women, blah, 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 is also kind of decreasing the voice, because we're not creating a new space to, through the research front, to be heard about what really concerns us. But there's now an increased interest around PrEP. Is it now long-acting? Is it now different components? It's all increasing the space for men to speak.
Yeah.
So at this meeting, sadly, that space is further expanded, because all you're seeing is those worlds of men. I mean, no gender bias. But the one area I think it's new and unfolding, and I think it's critical area that we can also start to hear and talk about is the issue of the vaginal microbiome and its impact on HIV risk.
Yes.
And that's really new and great, and
Yes.
something we as women must listen carefully to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things where we've been saying for so long, and I'm so glad that you said that because I was going to ask you next is what do you see on the horizon as we have to wrap up this very short conversation. And that is that we have continued to say that we don't know enough.
Oh, yeah.
The science world, the basic science, the clinical research, and
Agree.
even the social and behavioral to some degree, we don't know enough about women,
Agree.
women's lives, women's bodies.
Agree.
And we're not, as Dr. Hillier would say, we're not just smaller men in bodies, right? That there are real distinct biological as well as cultural even and contextual differences
Completely
in
agree.
which the research must be done,
Exactly.
how it gets implemented, and then how it's taken up by women in community. And those
completely
are
agree.
all, I think, the opportunities for, as you would say, the expansion of the field for us in research. Well, I really want to close this on just asking you one message for women who, especially our younger women who are either in academia or who are in community, who are already advocates or activists for women's issues and women's rights. What do you say to inspire them to bring the HIV context into, or to bring themselves into the research leadership for women?
I think that's a critical question. And first, before I get there, I think one of the things I want to see, and I want to push advocacy to continue to discuss, which for me was a gap I noticed at this CROI, is that every data that comes to CROI must, or any conference or any space, must discuss the gender differences.
Yes.
Okay? That's critical, and that's something we must hear and continue to understand, and not be asking of it as a post, but it must be a constant that when you're presenting data. Having said that, I think one of the things, for me, where I come from, I don't know the US context, but I think for me where I come from is the cultural inhibition for women, and that makes women feel they have to be quiet, and speaking up has its consequences.
Yeah.
I can tell you that it has its consequences. It's not everyone that can face the consequences, and it's not right for everybody to choose to want to face the consequences. Many times it's negative, not really positive for most times.
Yeah.
But then having said that, there have been generations of women that have worked to create that space for women to enjoy, and women must stand up to make good use and take advantages of those spaces. It's also very important to appreciate that you have women mentors. You shouldn't be scared of them. Women mentors are often very hard people because they didn't get into those space on the platter of gold.
Exactly.
So they do look like hard women. But believe me, most women mentors would very well support junior ladies that they would, For me, for example, I would want to create the path that completely frees you from the barriers and the challenges I went through. And so please look for those women mentors and make the best use of the spaces that will provide for your growth.
Yeah, absolutely. What really inspires me is that the more we can bring this conversation into a larger context of where we're going with women's rights even, women's access, women's inclusion, women's equality, women's equity, and dare I say it, women's liberation, is that if you're not addressing our sexual health issues, along with our economic issues, along with our development issues, along with our civil and political issues, you know, it's rare that I get to talk about HIV research as a women's rights or a human rights issue. And that's exactly what it is. And I'd love the opportunity to do that at a scientific meeting like CROI, even if I'm not hearing it from these very critical empirical spaces around the data and around the science. I'm certainly getting it in my conversations with the researchers and with the folks who participate in a lot of these studies and trials that are here. And so to that end, I'm wanting to give you a little bit of a chance to talk about the work that your advocacy society does and how people can find out more about it. I would also mention, you know, right here in the U.S., and I would actually come back and say that for Black women anywhere, speaking up and speaking out has its consequences, and it's absolutely necessary to take that leap. And I'm from the deep south of the U.S., and for a lot of people, they have to understand that's way more than a geographic distinction, which is why we work so well in the global south spaces, because there's so much commonality, especially around risk and around the HIV epidemic and women writ large, really. So we have the U.S. Women in PrEP Working Group, which is intentional around being advocates, monitoring the science, being engaged in helping hold accountable the research world and the research field around HIV prevention in women, with a lot of the things that you've already discussed and then some. And then you have the NIVMAS. So how do people, tell us a little bit about NIVMAS and how people may find out, a little bit more about you.
Well, first of all, I'll tell you how it all started. I think for me, listening to the spaces and the field about what it means to have access to HIV prevention back then was very critical. And back home, I knew it would not happen if we don't push our government. That was, I just knew this is beautiful, this is excellent. And at that time, it was saying HIV vaccine will come in 10 years. You know, that was the era of it's 10 years time. And so I just knew we had to mobilize ourselves to make the government responsible. And that was how the vision started. I came in from the HIV vaccine field. I mean, that was where I heard, and that was my interest. And then I had this colleague also who was doing a lot about microbicides. And I just said, look, the fundamentals are the same. It's community issues. It's about raising community awareness and asking community to have the power to position themselves where they should be. And so we joined forces and started what is NAFMAS. And the principle where we started was that, look, we were just going to go around and educate people, that they have a right and a voice. And they must use that to demand for what is ours. So that was the principle that actually informed the development, the starting of the organization and the work that we did in the field. So we spent a lot of time going around asking people and be there, be present, ask the questions. These are the fundamentals around the question, and just be there asking the government to be responsible. And so we go to those spaces and ask those questions. But we had to kind of strategize, because we're talking about 171 million people in Nigeria. That's really large. And so within the HIV prevention field, we realized that, this is what happens. The research comes to the vulnerable. And so we kind of coned down to vulnerable populations, key populations, women, young girls. And that was what our focus then. And so we started working with those communities to empower them. And when we talk about empowerment, it's about empowerment about the science. It's empowerment about the ethics. It's empowerment, and we do a lot of work around that, because the ethics makes it right. Then we also work with ethics committees and help them understand what it means to look for those things that protect the community, not just the science. So our work over the years that's focused extensively on that. We work with key populations and enable them understand the basics of this research and ask for, don't be used. You know, if you have to use them to get where you are, negotiate those differences.
That's right.
And for the ethics committee, we do a lot of work and ask, look, you're going to be the eyes of the community, look for those things.
Yeah.
And we're seeing successes in
Excellent.
that. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of successes
Excellent.
in that. Yeah.
Well, I want to, one more time, just take off my hat and say thank you, because you are a champion
Oh, you are too.
of so many. We are reflections of each other. And to just, reflect a little bit on what you were saying in terms of the, as I close, because we're wrapping up, is when you talk about expanding, and one of the challenges that I leave with us here is to continue to think about how we are also translators.
Agree.
And when we sit here and talk
Agree.
about the vaginal microbiome, and then have to figure out how do I take that back to the community and make that real. It's not going to be that difficult, but you have to be very intentional about that.
I agree.
So that we can continue to
Serious
bring people up
space,
and
yes.
into the space. And I would just leave it here as almost as an ellipse, is that even this conversation about PrEP and PrEP uptake and PrEP protection in women and all of that stuff, that's where the community meets the research community. And drive the message in a different way that really makes sense and resonates with the women who need it the most. So I want to thank you for doing what you do for so many thousands.
And thank you for doing what you do too.
Absolutely. And congratulations on a really, really cool and interesting and great conference this year.
Thank you.